Seraphine did not cry at her own rejection. She wanted to. She felt the urge the way you feel a sneeze coming, that full-body gathering of pressure, the sense that something was about to release whether you liked it or not. But she pressed her thumbnail into the wood of the archive desk where she had worked for 3 years, and she breathed through her nose, and the sneeze never came. 7 sentences. That was all it took. She had counted them. She would keep counting them for years after, the way you run your tongue over a cracked tooth. Not because you forget it is broken, but because you cannot stop checking that it still is. King Caelan Dusk stood at the center of the Blood Moon Hall, 700 wolves watching from the tiered seats around him, and he delivered those 7 sentences in the same tone he probably used to approve border patrol schedules. Measured, not unkind, which was somehow worse than cruelty, because cruelty you could despise and build a wall against, but measured indifference just sort of leaked through you and settled at the bottom of everything. He had already made his choice, he said. The Thornwall Luna, Ashveil, a bloodline alliance 400 years in the making. A political marriage the council had been engineering since before either of them was born. He was sorry, he said, though the word sat in the sentence the way furniture sits in a house no one lives in, technically present, not actually doing anything. He released her from the bond. She accepted the release. 7 sentences from him, 4 words from her. Then I release you. She added Alpha King at the end because she had worked in the archives long enough to know that legal acknowledgments required proper address, and because some part of her, the part that pressed thumbnails into wood and breathed through its nose, found a very dry satisfaction in being absolutely correct even when her world was ending. She left before the applause could settle. The thing no one tells you about a mating bond is that the rejection does not kill it. It cannot. That is not how it works. Seraphine had read enough of the old records to know this, had transcribed the case files and the elder testimonies and the 3 centuries of documented bond breaks, and in every single one of them, the wound remained. It changed shape. It calcified. It became something you carried instead of something that carried you. She carried hers out through the east gate of Ashveil territory at 4 in the morning, with a pack on her back that held 2 changes of clothes, her personal archive key, a wedge of hard cheese she'd been saving for a celebration that was obviously not happening, and a cracked notebook she had been writing in since she was 14. The guard at the east gate was a boy she had known since he was 11. He looked at her pack. He looked at her face. He opened the gate without a word. She liked him for that. She thought about him sometimes afterward, in the between years, and hoped that someone had given him something good for being kind at 4 in the morning, when kindness cost him nothing and everything simultaneously. The between places had no name on any official map, which Seraphine found both irritating and deeply on brand for something that existed primarily as a bureaucratic inconvenience. It was the land between pack territories, not unclaimed exactly, but claimed by no one in particular, which in wolf politics amounted to the same thing. Rogues passed through it, unmated wolves in exile, the occasional traveling elder who owed allegiances to so many packs that belonging to none was the only honest option. Seraphine built a life there the way she built everything, methodically, with documented reasoning, and with a level of stubbornness that her mother would have called a gift from your grandfather, and her grandfather, when alive, would have called the only thing keeping us upright. She started small. A contact, a listening ear, a woman who had memorized more pack law than most of the lawyers currently practicing it, appearing at the edge of a border dispute between 2 minor packs who had been fighting over a creek crossing for 19 years. She did not charge for the first mediation. She asked only to see the relevant documents. Within 4 hours she had found the original boundary deed, 3 subsequent amendments, 1 deeply illegal side agreement that 2 dead alphas had made in a tavern in 1887, and the specific clause that rendered the entire 19-year dispute moot. The creek was neither packs. It was a shared water right, held jointly, established by the Elder Council 412 years ago. Both packs were embarrassed. Neither contested the finding. Word traveled. Word always traveled in wolf communities, faster than it had any right to, carried on whatever invisible current, connected wolves who had never met, but somehow always knew. There is a woman in the between places. She knows the law. She does not take sides. She will find the thing that has been buried, and she will put it in front of you, and she will not flinch when you do not like it. Her name, in the between places, became the Pale One, not for her coloring, for the way she seemed to arrive at the edges of things, border crossings, failed alliances, collapsed negotiations, pale as morning, quiet as paperwork, twice as final. She had a tent that leaked on one side. She had a coat she had bought second-hand from a traveling merchant who had excellent taste and no sense of weather. She had the cracked notebook, now full, and 4 others she had filled since, and she slept with them under her bedroll because old habit dies slow, and also because she had never entirely trusted people who did not protect their records. She did not think about Caelan Dusk. She thought about him every night, not the way you think about something you want back, the way you think about a scar, not because you missed the wound, but because the skin grew back different, and you can feel the difference in the cold. The bond sat in her chest like that, a healed thing, a marked place. She had stopped expecting it to stop hurting and had simply started building her schedule around it, the way you schedule your commute around a broken traffic light, factoring the delay in, not being surprised by it, just moving through. Some nights it was easier than others. Some nights she pressed her thumbnail into the wood of whatever surface was nearest and breathed through her nose and counted to 7 for no reason she was willing to examine. She was in a way station near the Vale crossing when the old woman found her. Old was generous. What the woman was permanent. The kind of person who gives the impression of having been present at the original planning meeting for the universe and having several notes. She sat across from Seraphine at the way station's single table, and she put a leather satchel between them, and she said nothing for long enough that Seraphine put down her own work and looked up. "I know who you are," the woman said. "Most people do," Seraphine said. "There are only so many wolves running solo mediation operations in the between places." "No," the woman said. "I know who you are." She opened the satchel. The documents inside were old. Not archive old, the way Seraphine was used to, not the dry parchment fading of 300-year bureaucratic records. These were a different kind of old, the kind of old that feels like it is being careful with you, rather than the other way around. The woman spread them on the table. 4 pages. Dense text in an alphabet Seraphine recognized from the deepest shelves of the Ashveil archive. The pre-council script, the language used before the 5 territories consolidated, before kings were a thing wolves had. She read. She read again. She looked up at the old woman, who had the expression of someone watching a person find their wallet after believing it had been stolen. Patient, satisfied, slightly sorry it took this long. "Lunaris," Seraphine said. "Yes. The Lunaris bloodline is extinct." "The Lunaris bloodline," the woman said carefully, "is sitting at this table, drinking cold tea, and has been writing other people's territorial disputes into resolution for 3 years because no one told her she had something more important to do." The tent was quiet. Outside, the between places wind moved through the grass the way it always did, like it had somewhere to be, but was not in any rush to get there. Seraphine looked at the documents. The documents looked back. Her name was in them, not Seraphine Vale, archive clerk of Ashveil. Her actual name, her full bloodline name, 4 generations of traced lineage rendered in 400-year-old ink, concluding with a birth record she had never seen and a succession note that used words she had to pause over. Rightful heir, sovereign claim, wolf queen. The throne had not been empty. It had been misfiled, which in a certain very specific light was the funniest thing that had ever happened to her. She pressed her thumbnail into the table edge. She breathed through her nose. She did not cry, but it was a much closer call than the Blood Moon Hall had been, and for entirely different reasons. She came back to Ashveil on a Tuesday. She had thought about the timing. She had considered something more dramatic. A storm, a blood moon, some kind of portentous fog. She had rejected all of it. Drama was for people who did not have documentation. She had documentation. She had, in fact, a full satchel of it. The border wolves at the east gate, the same gate she had left through 3 years ago at 4 in the morning, stared at her with the expressions of people experiencing several conflicting realizations simultaneously. She gave them a moment to sort through it. They were doing their best. Seraphine Vale, one of them managed. Yes, she said. You're here, she agreed. Yes. Is there paperwork for returning from unregistered exile, or has that administrative process not been formalized yet? Because if not, I would like to propose one. They let her through. She walked into Ashveil territory with her satchel over her shoulder and her second-hand coat and 3.5 years of between-places weather in her bones, and she went directly to the pack hall because she had learned, in the between-places, that the fastest way to do anything was to go directly at it and let the fallout assemble itself around you. The pack hall was in the middle of a full council session. She opened the door. 17 wolves looked up from the table. 17, she counted. Force of habit. Caelan Dusk was at the head of the table. He looked exactly as she remembered him, which she resented in a calm and distant way, the way you resent weather for not accommodating your plans. Not personally, not with any illusion of power over it, just as a fact you note and file. He had the same gravity, the same stillness, the particular quality of space around him that powerful things have, the kind of presence that organizes a room without asking to. He was wearing something dark and formal, and he had the tired eyes of someone who had been in this session for a long time and expected it to go longer. He saw her. The room saw him see her. Every wolf at that table felt the temperature change, which was not metaphor. Bond chemistry was a real and documented phenomenon, and 17 witnesses later confirmed independently that the air in the council chamber did something unusual at the moment she walked in, something they variously described as a shift, a charge, like before a storm, and from one elder who had clearly read more poetry than the others, a reckoning arriving on quiet feet. She walked to the table. She put the satchel down. She opened it. "I apologize for the interruption," she said, in the same tone she had once used to deliver inventory reports. "I have documents relevant to the current crisis." The current crisis was this. Ivalice's bloodline, the Thornwall alliance that Caelan had chosen over a mating bond, had been built on a fraudulent treaty. Specifically, the territorial rights agreement that gave the Thornwall Pack co-governance of the eastern water routes, the agreement that had made the alliance politically necessary, the agreement that had been the stated reason for the entire political marriage in the first place. It was a forgery. A good one. A very good one. But Seraphine had, in the 8th month of her first year in the between places, mediated a border dispute involving a pack that shared water rights with the Thornwall territory, and she had noticed something in the language of their common treaty, a phrasing inconsistency, a date that could not be right given the council records she had already memorized, a signature in a hand that did not match 3 other verified signatures from the same period. She had noted it in her 4th notebook. She had written, in careful archive shorthand, Thornwall Eastern Rights Treaty. Possible forgery, requires verification. She had also, 3.5 years ago, written that same note in a formal report that she filed to the Ashveil Council archives before she left. She pulled that report from the satchel now, dated, signed, stamped with her archive seal. Verified as received by the archive intake system, she had the intake receipt, because she always kept intake receipts, because she had worked in an archive and she knew exactly what happened to things that did not have intake receipts. The council chamber was very quiet. She placed the report on the table. She placed beside it the original treaty analysis she had completed in the between places, the one that had required 6 months of cross-referencing with pre-council records she had photographed on visits to 4 separate pack libraries. She placed the Lunaris succession documents beside that. 17 wolves looked at the table. 1 wolf looked at her. She did not look back. Not yet. She was organizing the documents. "The Eastern Rights Treaty is a forgery," she said. "I can walk through the evidence in whatever order the council prefers. I would recommend starting with the signature analysis, because it is the most straightforward, but the dating inconsistencies are arguably more damning if you prefer narrative clarity." The elder on the left said, "Who are you?" The elder on the right, who was older and had a better memory, said, "She knows who she is. The question is whether we do." She looked up then. At Caelan. He had not moved. He was looking at her with the expression of a man doing extremely fast and extremely private mathematics. Recalculating, she imagined, everything. The alliance. The reports he had not read. The woman standing at his council table with 400 years of bloodline claim and an intake receipt. The bond pulsed. She felt it like a hand pressed flat against her sternum. Familiar, specific. The ghost warmth of a thing that had never stopped existing even when it had been legally set aside, and she watched the exact moment he felt it too, watched it cross his face and be contained and controlled the way he controlled everything, through sheer structural discipline, through the practiced blankness of a man who had learned to be unreadable as an act of survival. She looked away first. She was not ready for that conversation. She had documents to present. Ivelisse was escorted from the hall before the session's end. Not dramatically. There was no shouting, no scene. That was not how pack politics worked at this level. At this level, things happened in the language of forms and motions and formal acknowledgments, which Seraphine had always felt was both deeply civilized and deeply terrifying, because it meant you could dismantle someone's entire position without raising your voice. The motion was introduced by the council's eldest member. It was seconded by 3 others before Caelan formally acknowledged it. The treaty was annulled. The alliance was dissolved. The Thornwall claim to the eastern water routes was suspended, pending a full investigation, which Seraphine noted would probably take 18 months, and recommended 3 specific archivists she trusted to handle, without bias. The Lunaris documents went to the Elder Panel for verification, which took 4 hours. She sat in the corridor during those 4 hours and ate the second-to-last ration bar from her satchel and read the waystation records she had been meaning to update and tried very hard not to think about what was happening in the room where 3 elders were looking at her bloodline in 400-year-old ink. She counted cracks in the stone wall opposite. 31. She was on her second count when the door opened and the eldest elder stepped out and looked at her, with eyes that had been doing something complicated for a while and had not entirely resolved. "The claim is verified," he said. She nodded. "There are protocols," he started. "I know the protocols," she said. "I wrote a summary of them for the archive 3 years ago. It is filed under Lunaris succession, historical subsection dormant claims. It was also not read." The elder had the grace to look somewhat ashamed. She ate the last of the ration bar. He came to her at night, not as a king, no guard, no coat. He was just a man walking into the archive, her archive, the one she had spent 3 years in before she left, the one that smelled like she remembered, old paper and cedar, and the particular kind of quiet that only ever exists in rooms full of stored things. She was reshelving. Old habit. She had come back and found the archive in a state she would charitably describe as loosely organized, and she had been reshelving for 40 minutes, with the focused energy of a person doing something with her hands, so she did not have to do something with her face. She heard him at the door. She kept shelving. He stood there long enough that she finished the shelf and started the next one. He let her. She did not know whether that was respect or uncertainty or both, and she found she did not have the bandwidth to deduce it. "Seraphine," he said. "I am aware of my own name," she said. She heard him exhale. Not quite a laugh. The involuntary version of a laugh, the kind that escapes before the face can stop it. "The report," he said. "The one you filed, before you left." "Yes." "I did not read it." "I know. I should have." "Yes," she said. "You should have." She turned around. She had to eventually. She could not reshelve indefinitely. The archive was not that large and she was very aware of the math. She turned around and she put her back against the shelf, and she looked at him across the narrow width of the archive, and he looked like someone who had been holding something heavy for a long time and was not sure whether he was allowed to put it down. He looked tired. She had not expected that. She had built a version of him in the between years that was mostly structural, the gravity, the discipline, the shape of a man who made decisions like a machine and felt like architecture. The tired was new. Or maybe it was not new, and she had just not been looking for it before. "I was wrong," he said. He said it simply, plainly, without qualifications attached, without the particular legal grammar that power uses to say things while technically leaving the meaning in question. He just said it, flat and plain, the way you say something when you have run out of the energy required to say it any other way. She waited. "I made a decision with my head," he said, "and I told myself it was strategy. And it was. But it was also," he stopped, started again. "I knew what I was rejecting. I was not confused about it. I knew." And, quote. The archive was very quiet. Seraphine felt the bond pull at her chest with the patience of something that has been waiting 3 years and can wait 3 more if it must. "7 sentences," she said. He looked at her. "I counted them," she said. "I still count them sometimes. 3 a.m., nothing to do, 7 sentences. I have analyzed them from every angle available to me, and I want you to know they were grammatically correct throughout." Something moved in his face, not quite pain, adjacent to it. "I know," he said. "I wrote them 4 times. She had not expected that either. She looked at him for a moment. This man who had written her rejection 4 times before delivering it, who had been careful about the grammar while ending the bond, and she felt something complicated happen in her chest that she was not naming in front of him, or possibly ever. "I am not the same person who left," she said. "I know," he said again. "I am not going to be the Luna of Ashveil," she said. "That is not a position I will accept. The Lunaris seat is separate, sovereign. I have documentation on this." "I know," he said, and there was something in the third repetition of it, a worn quality, an exhausted quality, the sound of a man who has spent 3 years knowing things he cannot do anything about. "Then what are you here for?" she asked. He crossed the archive. 3 steps in the narrow space, and he was close enough that she could feel the bond in the air between them, the old warmth that had never fully gone, and he did not reach for her. He stopped short of that. He stood at the distance of someone asking permission, and he said, "I don't know what I'm allowed to want anymore." She looked at him. He looked back. Outside the archive, Ashveil territory was settling into sleep, 700 wolves finishing a day that had rearranged itself entirely by noon, and inside, in the cedar and paper quiet, 2 people stood across from the wreckage of a very specific kind of almost thing and tried to work out what came next. "You are allowed to want things," she said finally. "Whether you get them is a different question." He nodded. He understood the difference. He had always been good at that, understanding the space between want and have, between right and earned. "I have conditions," she said. "I know, legally documented ones. I assumed. I am going to want to reorganize the entire archive system before we have any further conversations," she said, "because someone in the last 3 years has been filing border reports under treaty rather than dispute, and the system is in a state that I find genuinely distressing." He looked at her. She looked at the shelves. "You walked back into Ashveil today with 400 years of bloodline claim," he said, "and you are telling me you are upset about the filing system." "The filing system," she said, "is where things go to be found. If the filing system fails, the thing is lost. I have first-hand experience with this problem." One quote. The silence that followed was not an empty silence. It had texture and weight, and the particular quality of 2 people doing their emotional accounting in the same room without comparing numbers yet. "I am sorry," he said. "Not the administrative sorry. The other kind. The kind that lives in the chest and does not have proper grammar and means what it says." She nodded. She turned back to the shelves. She picked up the next stack of misfiled reports. He did not leave. He sat in the chair in the corner, the one she had always meant to reupholster and never had, and he watched her work. He did not offer to help because he had enough intelligence to understand that this was not about the shelves, not really, that she was doing what she needed to do, and what she needed was for the archive to be in order, and for him to exist in the same room without the conversation being finished. She let him stay. She filed until 2 in the morning. He fell asleep in the chair somewhere around midnight, and she looked at him for a moment, just a moment, at this man who had written her rejection 4 times and built his kingdom on a fraudulent alliance and come to the archive in the dark without his coat and fallen asleep in the reupholstery-deferred chair. She pressed her thumbnail into the edge of the shelf. She breathed through her nose. She went back to filing. The terms were presented in writing. Of course they were. Seraphine had spent 2 weeks drafting them, with the 2 elders she trusted most, and a council-appointed legal recorder who had the very specific expression of someone witnessing something they would be telling their grandchildren about. The document was 14 pages. It established the Lunaris seat as a sovereign governing body with co-equal authority, alongside the Alpha King, in matters of pack law, territorial dispute, and elder council decisions. It outlined the separate administrative structure, the independent archive, the shared and non-shared jurisdictions. It also, in a 2-paragraph addendum that she had written herself and that the legal recorder had copied without comment, addressed the matter of the mating bond, acknowledging its continued existence as a biological and legal fact, neither formally reinstated nor formally denied, held in a documented state of ongoing determination, which was a term she had found in a 700-year-old elder council ruling on a case not entirely unlike her own. She had a gift for finding the right record. Caelan read all 14 pages. He asked 3 clarifying questions. She answered them precisely. He signed. She took the document, made 3 copies, filed the original in the new Lunaris archive she was establishing in the East Wing, gave 1 copy to the Elder Council, and put the second on the desk of the legal recorder with a note that said, "Please index under sovereign agreements, not treaty, and if anyone files it under treaty, I will personally reorganize the entire system again." The legal recorder filed it correctly. She suspected they feared her, which was fine, healthy even. The Ashveil East Wing archive was smaller than the main one. That was fine. She had worked with smaller. She built it the way she built everything, methodically. With cedar shelves she measured herself. With a cataloging system she wrote out in longhand before digitizing. With a worn smooth desk that she had bought at the Between Places Waystation Market from a merchant who had not known what he had, and a second-hand coat that still smelled faintly of 3 years of border-crossing winters. She kept the coat. She kept the cracked notebook and the 4 that followed it. She kept the intake receipt from the report she had filed 3.5 years ago, the one about the Thornwall Treaty, the one that had not been read, the one that had been right, filed under personal documentation, subcategory things that were true before anyone was ready for them. She was, for the first time since she was 14, and making notes about bloodlines in archival margins nobody checked. Home. Not home the way Ashveil was home before she left. That home had been borrowed, a room in a building that belonged to a pack that had not known what to do with her, a desk in an archive she had treated with more care than anyone had treated her. This was different. This was home the way the old records described it, as a thing you build over the place where you land, the thing that makes the landing mean something. Caelan came to the East Wing sometimes. They talked. Mostly about work, border disputes, elder council motions, the 17 ongoing cases that she had taken from the Between Places and was finishing from her new jurisdiction. Sometimes about other things. The conversations were careful at first, with the careful quality of people handling something old and fragile that might still hold weight or might not. The bond held. It had always held. She stopped counting the 7 sentences around the 6th month. Not because she forgave him, exactly. Forgiveness was not the right word for the thing she was doing, which was more architectural than emotional, more about building something new on honest ground than about demolishing what had stood before. But the count stopped being what she reached for at 3 in the morning, and something else took its place. Something she did not have a record classification for yet. She was working on it. The archive was a good place to work on things. Quiet, cedar-scented, full of stored truths that had been waiting to be found. She was, in a certain very specific light, one of those truths. The work she found was good. The Between Places had made her good at it in a way that being merely correct never had. Not just technically right, not just the woman who found the document, but genuinely good at the slow and patient work of building something trustworthy in a world full of things that had been misfiled, lost, fraudulent, or simply never read. She had been misfiled. She had found herself. She had filed herself correctly. The work continued. Outside, Ashveil went about its life, and the Eastern Water Route investigation progressed, and the 5 territories adjusted themselves around the re-established Lunaris seat with the particular grace of entities that had been wrong and knew it, and were not going to say so, but were going to act like it, which she had learned to accept as the functional equivalent in politics. The cracked notebook sat on her desk. She opened it sometimes, to the early pages, to the 14-year-old handwriting in the margins of someone else's archive, and she read what she had written about bloodlines and old law, and the Lunaris succession records that she had found on the deepest shelf, and thought were interesting for no reason she could explain. She had been right then, too. She had just not had the documentation to prove it yet. Now she did. She filed that, too, in triplicate, correctly indexed, with full cross-references and an intake receipt. She kept the receipt. She always kept the receipts. Some things are not lost. They are only waiting for the right person to look in the right place. The archive always tells the truth. You just have to know how to read it.